In 1983, Toronto the Good was still a place of innocence. Quiet streets and safe neighborhoods. But a random act of violence against teenager Barbara Turnbull shattered that innocence. Could detectives and forensic scientists catch the culprits and bring justice to a shaken city? Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Most of us believe that evil exists, but few of us have ever come face to face with it. This is a story of a 17-year-old girl who was forced to face it and how it changed her life. Exhibit A, a Colt Python, also called a snake gun. It started with a gun store robbery in a Toronto suburb. While the gang diverted police to a local bank where they had set off a propane tank, they broke into a gun shop on the other side of town. They got away with 13 guns, including a .38 Colt Python. If there was such a thing as a typical teenager, Barbara Turnbull was it. An average student from a large working-class family headed by a single, hard-working mother. Barbara was thrilled to work part-time at the local convenience store. On a Friday night, 6 weeks after the gun store robbery, Barbara was closing the store alone for the first time. The next 15 minutes would forever change her life. We pick up the story with Barbara Turnbull herself.
At 11:15, I was straightening the cigarette shelves when the door opened. I saw two figures who had ski masks and were carrying guns. And as the first person came in a few feet into the store, raised his arm and fired the gun. I didn't think it was a real gun. Because the sound is not what people expect. It's not what you hear on television. It's not what you hear in the movies. It's a very innocent sounding pop. I fell and hit the floor. I heard feet come running around the corner. I heard buttons on the cash register as he was trying to open the drawer. I heard the drawer open. And then I heard feet go running out, and I heard somebody say, "Let's get out of here."
In the minutes afterwards, Barbara feared the robbers would come back and kill her. She also had a sickening sense of foreboding in her stomach. It felt like her arms and legs were in the air above her.
And when I looked to see where my arm was, that's when I moved my eyes to my right, and that's when I saw the blood on the floor. And that's when I realized it had to have been a real bullet.
As she lay there, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was battling for her life.
There was a part of me that knew if I closed my eyes that that would be it, that I wouldn't be able to open them again.
For 15 minutes, she lay in a pool of blood. Then a customer discovered her and phoned for help. The ambulance attendant who gave her oxygen at the store reported she could move her legs and squeeze her hands on command. But by the time she reached the hospital, she could no longer move anything below her neck, and she could no longer talk. Detective Bill Whitlock was one of the first investigators to question Barbara.
Well, communicated a little bit later with her by she blinking her eyes and asked her questions, and she was able to respond with a blink. I was asking how many people, 1, 2, 3, description if she could give me any.
Just questions that they could sort of give me information and I could say yes or no to that.
While surgeons were trying to save Barbara's life, 3 people were in a dance club celebrating with champagne. One of them, witnesses later testified, even imitated Michael Jackson's moonwalk. Barbara Turnbull underwent a 7-hour operation to save her life. The doctors extracted the bullet which had hit her in the spine and lodged in her left shoulder. They removed bone fragments that were pressing against her spinal cord and fused 3 vertebrae. She was also fitted with a halo vest, 4 posts embedded with screws right into her skull. The police sent the bullet that doctors had removed from Barbara to the firearms section at the Center of Forensic Sciences. To understand how bullets can be identified, you need to know that commercial manufacturers cut spiral grooves on the inside of the barrel to stabilize the bullet, like a well-thrown football. The bullet, as it's fired, bites into these spiral grooves, leaving unique striations known as rifling marks.
They asked me what caliber it was and what kind of firearm I thought had fired it.
They determined the projectile was in the .38 caliber, .357 Magnum range.
When I examined it microscopically, I found it had been fired from a firearm which was rifled 6 grooves, left-hand twist. In other words, when the projectile passed through the barrel, it was spinning to its left. And that enabled me to say, yes, I know there's only a certain number of firearms that bear those rifling specifications. The most common is probably a revolver made by Colt.
Using this information, the police checked out lists of stolen guns and noticed that a .357 Colt was one of the guns stolen in the recent gun store robbery. Who had broken into the gun store? Who had shot Barbara Turnbull? And what would it take to bring them to justice? In the days after the shooting, psychologically, Barbara was in rough shape.
Every time I closed my eyes, I got shot again. Over and over again.
Earlier on the day Barbara Turnbull was shot, the police had received a disturbing phone call from a young woman.
Now, the young lady called in. She'd related facts to being abducted, and they wanted to work the streets as a prostitute.
You don't want to deal with me, you're gonna have to work for me.
One of the guys put a gun to her head and she thought he was going to shoot her. But the others told him not to hurt her face because they would need her pretty looks. But he warned her, the next one you'll get if you don't do what I say. She was so scared she told them she would work for them, but instead she called the police. But there was something else she reported, something especially chilling. She said she overheard the guys talking about holding up a convenience store that night. If only the girl had overheard which convenience store, police might have been able to prevent Barbara Turnbull from being shot. The young woman also gave the police the names of her abductors. The 4 were Hugh Logan, his brother Sutcliffe Logan, Clive Brown, and Warren Johnson. The following morning, the morning after Barbara was shot, the police arrested the Logan brothers and Clive Brown. Warren Johnson gave himself up the next day. Sutcliffe Logan was questioned first. Barbara Turnbull was shot shortly after 11 p.m. And he boasted he had witnesses who saw him at the dance club from 9:30 p.m. on. He maintained he had nothing to do with the convenience store holdup. The next was Clive Brown. Clive admitted taking part in the robbery with you and Warren, but insisted he entered the store after the shooting. In fact, he claimed he had been horrified to see the face of the wounded girl. Barbara Turnbull had been in one of his 10th grade classes. Clive also claimed it bothered him so much he didn't go dancing with the others when they met Sutcliffe at the dance club later that night. Clive said he didn't see the shooting, but he believed Hugh Logan was the shooter. When Warren Johnson was interviewed, he told the police he followed you into the store and had seen you shoot the poor girl. Hugh Logan didn't deny he'd shot Barbara, but he put a particular spin on it. He claimed he was the first one to enter the store, and though he knew someone had to be there, he didn't see anyone at first, so he had his gun up in the air. Then all of a sudden, the girl at the cash register screamed, and it startled him. And he just turned around and the gun went off accidentally.
Basically, they stated they were in there for the robbery, had loaded guns, and the gun went off accidentally.
The police had a statement case, meaning it was stitched together with the statements taken from the 4 accused. But a statement case is like a house of cards. If one of the accused changes his story or the court throws out one of the statements, the whole case can come crashing down. So it is imperative to back it up with physical evidence. Hugh and Warren directed the police to a back alley dumpster where they recovered a gun and a crushed cartridge. The gun was a .357 Colt, a snake gun. The serial number matched the one stolen in the gun store robbery. The cartridge was a .38. Someone had purposely crushed it to prevent it from being identified. But unluckily for him, he had crushed the wrong part.
The part that had been damaged is not usually used for identification purposes. We use the bottom of the cartridge case, the base, where the primer is located, and they'll be just as individual as projectiles. In fact, they're sometimes easier to work with. And you can say, yes, that cartridge case was fired in that firearm and no other.
The next question was, could the projectile that hit Barbara's spine be matched to this particular gun?
At that point, I then test fired it in a water recovery tank, recovered projectiles from the revolver. And what I do then, I'll compare them to one another.
Using a stereoscopic microscope, the recovered projectile was compared to the one removed from Barbara Turnbull.
I think it only took me a matter of less than an hour, and I was able to tell them, yeah, in my opinion, that bullet out of Barbara Turnbull was fired from that revolver that you found.
As for Barbara, in the days after the shooting, her nightmares stopped. But the reality of her injury became scarier. At first, she found comfort in thinking that she would soon be up on crutches, resuming her normal life. But gradually, one illusion after another was stripped away.
When I gave up the notion of being on crutches and being able to do everything for myself, then in my mind, I was at least going to have my arms and my hands. And when I didn't have that, then it was my fingers were going to be curled, but I'd still be able to eat on my own.
But a callous resident, perhaps thinking he was doing her a favor, slammed her with the brutal truth.
And said, look, you're a quad, you're going to be a quad, you're on a respirator, this is the way you're going to be. This is the way your life is going to be, and the sooner you adapt to it and accept it, the better.
Now she knew she was imprisoned in a body that could not move. It was beyond unfair, perhaps even beyond livable. For the next year, Barbara's life was a medical, emotional, and spiritual roller coaster, careening between living and simply being alive. Beneath it all lay the question, why? Why me? Why was she shot without even being asked for the money? As the trial drew near, one big question lingered. Hugh Logan claimed he shot Barbara Turnbull accidentally. If it was true, his sentence would be relatively light. But was it true? A year after the shooting, Barbara, now released from the hospital, had an overwhelming desire to visit the convenience store where she had been shot. Memories flooded in. Her thrill at getting the job, her pride at dealing with customers, how she even loved the smell of the store.
I just wanted a moment to reflect. I wanted to sit and look at the place, the last place I stood up, the last moments that I had of being, pretty carefree.
But her attendant pulled her away from behind the counter so quickly, she only got the briefest glimpse. There would be no closure here. As the trial approached, the police had suspicions that Sutcliffe Logan had something to do with the convenience store robbery, but they had no proof.
Now, at this period of time, we couldn't put Sutcliffe Logan at the scene of the shooting. We felt that he was a part of it and probably orchestrated it, but we couldn't put him at the scene. So we devised a plan to put some undercover police officers in the institution where they were being held.
The gamble paid off. Sutcliffe boasted, "I set it up. I set the whole thing up." He talked about how much better it would have been for the gang if that blood-clot bitch had died that night. The story would have faded, taken the heat off them. Sutcliffe Logan's name was subsequently added to that of Hugh Logan, Clive Brown, and Warren Johnson in the attempted murder charges. The prosecution hoped it now had everything for a successful trial, but investigators' concerns about the fragility of a statement case proved to be true.
During the process of the trial, they tried to change the story somewhat to confuse the jury, which is what happened.
On the stand, Hugh denied being the shooter and claimed that his brother Sutcliffe was the shooter. Hugh claimed he had confessed because he was afraid of his brother. Even when it was brought up that after the shooting, Hugh had celebrated with champagne and had danced, he claimed he had done this at Sutcliffe's request. Hugh told the court his heart ached about Barbara. When he could take it no longer, Warren Johnson jumped up and screamed, "Let your heart ache now because you know you shot her." That settled the question of who had been the shooter, but not whether Hugh Logan, as he claimed, had shot Barbara Turnbull accidentally. To help determine that, the gun was test-fired in the lab.
This particular revolver can be fired two ways. It can be fired single action, which occurs when you cock the hammer and then apply pressure on the trigger. The other way it can be fired is double action. We just squeeze the trigger. When it's cocked like this in the single action mode, then it's the easiest to fire because it requires very little pressure on the trigger.
With this evidence in hand, the prosecutor asked Warren Johnson to describe exactly how Hugh had held the gun outside the store. Johnson stunned the court when he answered, "Hugh Logan cocked the gun." But it was Barbara's testimony that clinched the case. After describing how Hugh had taken a combat stance, the prosecution asked her one totally unrehearsed question.
The question was, describe the manner in which he raised his arm and fired. And the only word I could think of was deliberate.
The gang had wanted to set up a prostitution ring, so Sutcliffe Logan had masterminded the gun store break-in, the abduction of the girl, and the convenience store robbery. They planned to use the stolen money to incorporate themselves as an escort service. What had not been planned was that Hugh Logan cocked the gun.
I have no idea why he cocked the gun. I have no idea why he pulled the trigger. I have no idea. Stupid, 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 stupid. It was a waste of, I'm not saying that my life was wasted, but it was just an incredible, unnecessary act that changed the course of all of our lives and the lives of our family and our families and our friends, and was just incredibly stupid.
For their part in the robbery and shooting that netted less than $150, Clive Brown was sentenced to 9 years. Warren Johnson, 11. Sutcliffe Logan, 13. And Hugh Logan, the shooter, 20 years. In the years since the shooting, Barbara Turnbull has built what might be called a second life. Against all odds, she put herself through university, graduated magna cum laude and class valedictorian. Since 1989, she has been a reporter for a major Toronto newspaper. She also chronicled her thoughts about the shooting and its aftermath in her autobiography, Looking in the Mirror.
What I see when I look in the mirror is what I wish everybody saw when they look at me. I see a woman. I see a reporter. I see a good person. I see a good friend. And on my good days, I don't ever put disabled in front of any of those things.
The stories on Exhibit A are based on true cases. The forensic scientists and investigators are the actual individuals who worked on the cases. The names of the guilty are real.